So let's talk about one of the most powerful ideas in all of modern history, nationalism. This is an idea that literally redrew the map of Europe, toppled ancient empires, and, created the very world of nations that we live in right now. And it all kicked off not with a big war, but with a dream. Take a look at this. This painting right here. This was the dream. An artist named Frederick Souriau created it back in 1848. What you're seeing is this long line of people from all across Europe and America marching right past the Statue of Liberty. In one hand, she's holding up the torch of enlightenment, and in the other, the Charter of the Rights of Man. And look down on the ground. You see all those shattered crowns and broken thrones? Those are the symbols of the old kings, totally destroyed. It's this incredible, hopeful vision of a future made up of free, independent nations. But that's the big question, isn't it? How did we get from a world ruled by just a few kings and emperors to the one we have today? What exactly is a nation, anyway? And what had to happen for this beautiful dream to even start looking like a real possibility?
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to rewind a bit. We need to see what the world looked like before this whole nations thing took off. And before nations, Europe was a world of empires.
And here's the key difference, right? Your identity wasn't tied to a people or a shared culture. It was tied to a ruler. You weren't, say, Austrian. You were simply a subject of the Habsburg Emperor. It was a completely different way of looking at the world and your place in it.
And this is a perfect example of what one of those old empires looked like. I mean, just look at the Habsburg Empire. It was this giant patchwork quilt of different regions and peoples all stitched together. You had German-speaking nobles, Italian-speaking provinces, Poles, Magyars, Croats, Slovaks, you name it. They didn't have a common language, no shared culture. The only thing holding this whole thing together was that they were all loyal to one guy, the emperor.
And this slide, wow, it just lays out the massive shift perfectly. The idea of the nation-state basically turned everything completely upside down. Instead of being loyal to a king, you were loyal to the people. Instead of a jumble of different groups, the goal was a common identity. And the absolute power of one ruler, that was replaced by the idea of a government that gets its power from the consent of its citizens, a total revolution in thinking.
So, what lit the fuse? What was the spark that ignited this incredible change? Well, for that, we need to head over to France, because one single revolution was about to change, well, pretty much everything.
1789. That's the year, the French Revolution. This is it. This is the moment where the idea of nationalism just explodes onto the European stage in a really clear and powerful way for the first time.
And this right here, this was the absolute game changer. Before, the thinking was simple. The king was the state. But the revolution came along and said, no way. It declared that it was the people, the community of citizens, who would now make up the nation and control its destiny. But how do you actually make millions of people feel like they're part of one big nation? Well, the French revolutionaries basically had a checklist. First, they introduced new ideas, like la patrie, the fatherland, and le citoyen, the citizen, to make everyone feel like they belonged to a single community. Then, they created new symbols, like the tricolor flag, to replace the old royal banners. They also centralized everything, creating one system of laws and one system of weights and measures for the whole country. And, crucially, they promoted the French they spoke in Paris as the national language, trying to get rid of all those regional dialects. This was Nation Building 101.
Now, these revolutionary ideas didn't just stay in France, and the person who ended up spreading them all over Europe was, ironically, the same guy who crushed France's democracy to make himself emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte. See, as Napoleon's armies marched across the continent, they brought with them something called the Napoleonic Code. And for a lot of people, it was like a breath of fresh air. It got rid of the old, rigid feudal system, it said you couldn't have privileges just because of who your parents were, and it established that everyone was equal before the law. So in places like Holland, Switzerland, and parts of Italy and Germany, people at first saw the French armies as liberators.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there? That warm welcome didn't last long. As you can see in this German painting, the so-called liberators soon started to look a lot more like occupiers. The French brought in heavy taxes, censorship, and started forcing men to join their armies so they could conquer the rest of Europe. Turns out, the promise of liberty came with a pretty steep price, and that initial welcome turned sour really fast.
So, if it wasn't just armies spreading the idea, who was really carrying the torch for this new concept of the nation? The answer, it turns out,
lies with a brand new social class that was getting more and more powerful all across Europe.
It was the rising middle class. We're talking about industrialists, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, teachers. These were the real engines of nationalism. For them, a united nation just made total sense. A single country meant uniform laws, no crazy customs barriers between regions, and a common currency. All of that made it way easier to do business and make money.
Their political philosophy was liberalism. And at its heart, liberalism stood for freedom for the individual, equality for everyone under the law, and a government that was actually based on the consent of the people. Sound familiar? These were the exact ideas that came out of the French Revolution. For these middle-class liberals, creating a nation-state was the perfect way to finally get rid of the old world of kings and aristocrats and build something new.
But you know, a nation is more than just economics or laws. It's an idea, it's a feeling. And in 1882, a philosopher named Ernst Renan came up with maybe the most beautiful definition of what a nation really is. He argued that it's not really about a shared language or living in the same place. He said a nation's existence is a daily plebiscite, a daily choice. It's the collective will of people every single day to choose to continue their common life together. A nation, he was saying, is a constant active choice.
Which brings us right back here to where we started. When we look at Soryu's painting now, with everything we know, it hits different, doesn't it? It's not just some fantasy anymore. It's a picture of that very idea in action. The idea that people could choose to become a nation, to throw away those shattered crowns of the old rulers, and to march together, under their own flag, into a future they would make for themselves.
And that core idea that a nation isn't some finished product just sitting there, but a choice that we all make every single day is as real and as important now as it ever was. Which leaves all of us with a pretty big question to think about. If a nation is a daily choice, what choice will we make tomorrow?